Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I'm Ashraf Engineer. The Elgar Parishad case, in which several activists were arrested, with investigating agencies claiming their speeches and actions led to violence in Bhima Koregaon near Pune in 2018, drags on. A couple of months ago, Dalit scholar Anand Teltumbde finally got bail after spending over 2.5 years in prison. Earlier, lawyer activist Sudha Bhardwaj and poet Varavara Rao had also got bail, again only after spending years in prison. But others, such as Vernon Gonsalves, continue to languish behind bars. 84-year-old Jharkhand-based tribal rights activist Father Stan Swamy, meanwhile, died in custody on July 5, 2021 after a prolonged illness. It was alleged that medical care was not made available to him on time. What does this case tell us about the state of human rights in India and about the effectiveness or lack of it of the judiciary?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show lawyer and human rights activist Susan Abraham, who's been at the forefront of the Elgar Parishad case. She's also the wife of Vernon Gonsalves. Susan, welcome.
Thanks, Ashraf, for having me on the show.
You're very, very welcome. Before we start, could you give listeners a brief overview of the Elgar Parishad case and what the activists are accused of?
Ashraf, it's very difficult to give a brief overview, mainly because this case defies all logic, defies any thinking on how the legal system in our country that is supposed to work on the principles of constitutional principles that a person is there has to be some sort of a crime for which people are arrested, incarcerated. But this case defies any logic, or it creates this perpetual sense of disbelief in whoever talks about it, or mainly because it really is based on a falsehood, is based on complete fabrication, and the prosecution or the persons who involved so many persons as accused in this case, they call it a conspiracy. But right from the start, I have been referring to this case as a conspiracy case, because this is a pattern which the British used to follow during the freedom struggle, that all persons who were political dissenters to the British Raj, just through their writings, through their speeches, through the associations, organizations they belonged to, would get incarcerated in nothing tangible, not in any offense specific as such, but that there's this overall conspiracy to overthrow the British Raj. It's a similar scenario here, that they accuse all those who have been arrested for a conspiracy to destabilize this elected government and things like that. So basically, in a nutshell, I'll put it that way.
Yes. Now, various glaring irregularities have been pointed out in the investigation agency's allegations. For instance, a US forensics firm has said evidence had been planted on activist Rona Wilson's laptop.
Yes, we didn't have to rely on any US forensics to know that. In fact, the two people who were arrested in August, that is my husband Vernon and his co-writer, columnist Arun Ferreira. They used to write a column for, at that time, it was run by the India Today, called Daily O. And they wrote one piece for Daily O and one piece for Rediff, subsequent to the first 5 arrests which took place on 6th of June 2018. And in these two columns, these two separate columns, which were, say, the first one was written in July, the end of June, and the second one in July, talked about how it's impossible to believe that there is any basis to this case, and it is based on fabricated material, because from day one, the Pune police took press conferences saying that all these incriminatory letters were found on the electronic devices seized from Rona Wilson and Surendra Gadling. And it is their case that it is because they so very accurately exposed the machinations of the prosecution agency that the two of them were implicated. So they, along with Sudha Bhardwaj, Varavara Rao, and Gautam Navlaka, were the five who were originally named to be arrested on 28th of August 2018. Subsequent to this, the Caravan had done a story. The first story actually was not by the US forensic analytic company called Arsenal, but the first expose came in Caravan. Caravan carried a story sometime end of November, end of 2021, which itself did a analysis of Rona Wilson's clone copy received by us lawyers, and found that there were clear cases of traces of fabrication, malware being planted. And it's subsequent to that, the defense lawyers managed to contact this forensic agency called Arsenal, and they, because of the advanced tools of analysis that they have, were very accurately able to show that these so-called letters, these so-called incriminatory letters, were planted on the devices of Rona Wilson through a remote access program. A malware had been planted, and that is the source of these letters. And this was not known to the owner of the device, that is Rona Wilson. But it's not just Rona Wilson, because subsequently even Surendra Gadling's device had been given for analysis, and the same thing was found, that in the same method was used to plant, and this began in 2016. So you can imagine just how far back all this started. This whole planning to implicate this one person who, based in Delhi, was the secretary, or I don't know what his post was, but of an organization called Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners, that is Rona Wilson. And he had been campaigning against the incarceration of people who were accused in the GN Sai Baba case. And Surendra Gadling, who was the lawyer for GN Sai Baba in Gadchiroli of Sai Baba and the six others. So the targeting of persons, connected to this case began in 2016. And that is what this analysis showed.
Yeah, and it's also it's not the first time or the only time, I should say, that technology seems to have been used, because at least some of the activists were said to have been the targets of the Pegasus project, in which their phones were infected with spyware.
No, the Pegasus was subsequent actually. Pegasus
Yes,
was
after
purchased
that.
by the Indian government, which they denied, or they didn't deny it. Just see the brazenness of it. They were, the Supreme Court petitions were filed, and instead of the Supreme Court putting them to task for not answering the question, was the government involved or responsible for buying of this spyware called Pegasus from Israeli agency called NSO. The government refused to answer, saying that this involved India's security. So this by itself ought to have shown to the Supreme Court that the government is involved somewhere. But unfortunately, this didn't happen, and that case kind of went down the drain. But there too, in Pegasus also, it's 8 of the accused, including Vernon, 8 of the accused in the case, their phones, which were seized by the Pune police post their arrest, were found to be infected by Pegasus. But the precise nature of the analysis in Rona Wilson's case, what happened is that the same Arsenal did an examination of his, because he had an iPhone. So his iPhone data was saved in his hard disk. And an examination of that showed traces of Pegasus. So this was proof. But however, unfortunately, the Supreme Court just closed the case. So the targeting of human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, all this has been the downside and will also see the downfall of all democratic institutions in so-called democracies around the world, because this is what we are seeing, whether it's in the US or in Brazil. The brazen nature of right-wing attempts to capture all government institutions.
Now, late last year, Subdivisional Police Officer Ganesh More said under oath to the two-member Judicial Commission investigating the violence that the Elgar Parishad event had no role in the Bhima Koregaon violence. It seemed to blow a hole in the Pune police and National Investigating Agency's claims. What is your reaction?
We did not need to listen to Ganesh More evidence before the J.N. Patel Commission to know this, because this was said and loud and clear from all those who attended the Elgar Parishad by the conveners of Elgar Parishad, including retired Justice Sawant, P.B. Sawant, Justice Kholse Patil. P.B. Sawant is no more, but after the arrest, he said it on more than one occasion that he, being a convener of Elgar Parishad, he said very categorically that he doesn't know anyone except Sudhir Dhaule, who was on the Elgar Parishad munch on 31st December 2017. He didn't know any of the others, and they had nothing to do with Elgar Parishad. That is number one, those who got arrested. Number two, that the violence which happened on the 1st of January 2018, also none of the persons who organized Elgar Parishad had gone to the spot called Bhima Koregaon. Persons who attended it, they would have gone, because from there it's like what happens that they go on pilgrimage. So from there, those who came to attend the parishad, they walked to Bhima Koregaon or they went by their vehicles. But the perpetrators of that violence were clearly identified by the police, Pune Rural Police. The Pune Rural Police clearly said that the violence was caused by and instigated by Milind Ekbote and Sambhaji Bide. So this is on record. It did not require, Ganesh More is just one more person who's testified to this. But Sambhaji Bide has not even been arrested for a single day. Ekbote has been arrested, but he was soon released on bail because there were no serious charges of UAPA or anything like that put on him. So he came out on bail. But when his anticipatory bail reached the Supreme Court, it is the government of Maharashtra which filed an affidavit saying that he was responsible for the violence in and around Bhima Koregaon on the 1st of January.
Now, it is said that this case is part of a wider crackdown against Dalit mobilization and Dalit politics. What is your view?
I won't say it's only Dalit mobilization or Dalit politics. One thing is there that Elgar Parishad of 31st December 2017 basically celebrated the valor of the Dalit Bahujan, not even just the Dalits. Bahujan Dalit unity in overthrowing Peshwa rule 200 years ago. And the rallying call given at the Elgar Parishad was that the Navi Peshwai, that is the new Peshwa rule of the BJP in New Delhi as well as in Maharashtra, should be overthrown, should be defeated in the coming elections of 2019. So if you see the number of persons who are arrested, they are not predominantly Dalit, nor are they Dalit spokespersons. That is the strange thing about this case. In the first 5 people who were arrested in June, 6th of June, 2018, Sudhir Dhawle, Surendra Gadling were Dalits. The other three were not Dalits. In August, none of them were Dalits in August. And after the NIA took over the case, you had a leading Dalit scholar, Anand Teltumbde, of course, and three more persons who were at the Elgar Parishad, out of whom only one is a Dalit, that is Sagar Gorke. So it's not, I would not say this is targeting of Dalits. This is a targeting of persons who have dissented against this government. This is targeting of lawyers. This is targeting of writers, scholars, and activists. Basically, it's a curbing of dissent, which is what the minority judgment of Justice Chandrachud said in the Romila Thapar case, the PIL that had been filed in August 2018, where he said that dissent is a safety valve for any democracy, and the curbing of dissent is totally unconstitutional. And he had proposed that a SIT should be set up to look into the kind of allegations, and that clearly these letters based on which persons were being arrested. This is much before the Arsenal reports came out, that they clearly do not seem to be genuine, authentic documents, because none of them have signatures of the persons who've written them. They are not even emails. They are kind of PDF files. So how does, like if you base a case on material, that the material has to be authentic. So even to the uninitiated in the criminal law, it's very difficult to believe that these documents were authentic. If something is seized from your computer, you would know who is the author of something, who is the author of a letter or of a document. It's all there. But unfortunately, there is a lot of digital illiteracy in our country. So persons use digital devices without knowing the ABCs of how these things work. Now, you can't fault the user for it, but if a prosecution agency uses digital devices, digital evidence to accuse persons, then at least they should follow the basics of what's called Indian Evidence Act, of the Indian Electronic Evidence Act. So if it doesn't follow any of this, and just because, say, the judges there is no literacy amongst the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors, they get away with blue murder. That's what's happened in this case.
Now, with so many activists still in jail, what does that tell us about the state of human rights in India? And just for context, India was at 119th position in the Human Freedom Index report of 2021 out of 165 countries. And this was index drawn up by the Cato Institute of America and Fraser Institute of Canada.
It's not just a state of Indian democracy. It's also a crying shame on the state of Indian judiciary, because by the law set up by the Supreme Court in what's known as default bail, the first group of people who were arrested, 5 of them, that is the first 5 who were arrested, got an order from Bombay High Court saying the UAPA, the act under which they have been arrested, because it is a law which is so strict in terms of obtaining bail, it's equally strict on the prosecution agency to prove that whatever it is doing is very strictly within the boundaries of the law. Now, the law says that if the prosecution agency is asking for an extension of time for investigation and not filing a charge sheet within the 90 days prescribed under the UAPA, then they are entitled to what is called default bail. And this was argued at length, and the Bombay High Court was convinced, and the Bombay High Court set aside the order of the Pune court, special court, extending the time granted to the investigating agency to conduct further investigation. However, this is the sad state of the judiciary, that the judiciary today picks and chooses who it decides to set free. When their case was challenged by the Maharashtra government in the Supreme Court in November 2018, that is when they would have been set free on default pay. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi, Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, sets aside 5-judge bench judgment in Hitendra Thakur, who, by the way, was a gangster, who established case law precedent by showing how, under special security law, these are the ways in which the prosecution agency had transgressed the law, and hence that person is entitled to what is called statutory bail. And this was upheld by a 7-judge bench in Sanjay Dutt case. So in high-profile cases or in gangster cases, such law is upheld. But in the case of a human rights lawyer like Surendra Gadling and others, this case law has been deviated from. This is the sad state of the judiciary, is what I would say. That 5 persons who would have been out on default bail, till today they are rotting in jail only because of the non-application of the laws of default pay to them. So this is selective. This is called selective application. And this was very strictly commented upon by Justice recently in a lecture, where he said some journalists get bail in a day and others, like Siddiqui Kapan, they spend more than 1 year in jail. So this is what is happening. So ultimately, if the courts are the watchdogs of democracy, and the courts, whether they are the trial courts or the high courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court, does not maintain the strict vigils, then there's really very no hope for democracy in our country.
Describe life in jail for the activists.
Life in jail has been a near-death experience for so many of them. In fact, one of them, he died when Father Stan was brought to NIA court in October 13th, 2020, in the midst of the raging pandemic. He could barely walk, he could barely talk. In his quivering voice, he told the NIA court judge he doesn't know what is Elgar Parishad. He's never been to these places. And he's 83-year-old, and he's like suffering from various ailments, including Parkinson's disease. I mean, it fell on deaf ears for all that he said, and he was sent to jail. And his bail application, everyone talks about the Sipper story because sometimes these things pick up, media attention. But what the media should have paid more attention to was that when his bail was being argued in the NIA court, that bail hearing kept getting dragged on because the prosecution kept adding more and more material, saying that they have to do further search and raids at his place in Jharkhand, and it is there that his spirit was broken. Just seeing the way in which that whole bail hearing kept getting dragged on. Apart from him, Anand Teltumbde, Gautam Navlakha, they are 70 plus. Hani Babu, he got it was extremely serious during Corona, that eye infection. My husband Vernon himself was in hospital on oxygen support for more than 20 days. And especially the majority of them, out of these 16, most of them are 60 plus. And during the COVID pandemic, despite there being guidelines that persons who are senior citizens who are prone to illness and who have comorbidities should be considered for bail, this was not applied to people in this Bhima Koregaon case. Why? Because there is UAPA on them. So persons contracted COVID, like Varavara Rao, he nearly died. It is just because of the very hard work put in by lawyers, team led by Indira Jaising, that his life was saved. But Father Stan, the same attempt was there, but he himself, by the time he got admitted in hospital, he was too, his spirit had been broken. That's what people who were with him said, you know.
Have the families and lawyers of the activists been harassed in any way?
All of them have been harassed just to make a what's called a jail visit for any of the family member. They have to go and get some kind of police verification from their home. None of them are from Bombay. They all of them stay in far off places. So they have to get their local police to verify their authenticity and get some kind of a certificate. This is not envisaged in jail manual rules, but these kind of things are set up in the pretext of special laws being in place, as if you're dealing with hardcore gangsters or murderers, or they get away, they get bail, they come out, they walk out, but not. It's basically the intention is twofold. One is to set what's called the chilling effect on others. So this could happen to leading spokespersons of Dalit rights, minority rights, civil rights defenders. This can happen to anyone. And the second is to basically make them, how many will undergo this all this incarceration and come out without their spirits intact. It's a very difficult thing to say because it's, they will be broken in spirit, physically, mentally, their health, yeah, in all ways. So it's just the process that is a punishment.
Yes. And now you've been clear that the case is emblematic of the flaws in the Indian judicial system: delays, denial of bail, the odds stacked against the underdog. Susan, why are our courts failing us? What are the remedies?
That's a question which all of us are asking because it is the courts that are failing us. So if the courts are failing us and we have the best judicial, the legal eagles fighting this case pro bono, despite which law itself has become a kind of a prison wall, prison barriers. So what is the way out? One has to campaign for things like law reform, criminal justice system reform, jail reform, But here they're talking about building more jails. The way this government looks at it, it is not in terms of reformative law, but it is build more and more prisons and put more and more people behind bars. So that's not the way. That is the way autocracies function, not democracies.
Now, what is the implication on a society when the judicial system is ineffective? Why should the common citizen care? What does it mean for a democracy like ours?
Common citizen will lose hope, or the common citizen will believing in the majoritarian narrative that they are safe because they are with the government, and persons who have challenged or questioning the government is equivalent to them having committed a crime. So what does this do to democracy is to set in motion a thinking, public thinking, that you have to just be like sheep and follow, what the leaders and the rulers say. Now, this is not democracy. This is how feudalism worked. This is how slave society worked. So we are basically going back in time. We're not, going forward. We're not building democracy. We are hacking away at the basic structure of democracy. And you are seeing this happening in the way whatever little that the courts are doing, even that is being attacked by the government. So it's like the same Justice Bomaya. When he spoke, he said that pre 2014, the courts were extremely critical. The courts were like the watchdogs on so called corruption and 2G scam and all kinds of things. But today, the government puts a lid on everything. There is absolutely no investigation of any of this. So, this entire narrative has changed. The judiciary is not playing the role of being a watchdog. It hasn't become a lapdog yet, but it's being kind of pressurized to become that. And if that happens, then I don't know what future there is for democracy in this country.
If I may ask, what kind of a personal toll has this taken on you?
Personal toll, it has been tremendous because you ultimately have to, I mean, I've had to kind of put aside my own practice because so much of time goes in handling. It's very demanding, what's happening in the trial court, what's happening in various courts, the High Court, Supreme Court. And we are constantly on our toes trying to make sure that the best defense and no stone is left unturned. But I think the biggest encouragements come from those who are behind bars actually. It is they whose spirit remains unbroken, and it is they who keep giving this perspective that, we are still standing up straight, so everything is not lost. So it's they who keep the family strong and the lawyers, and so I would say that it's a challenge to keep one's spirits.
What's next for the case and your legal role in it?
We formed a team of defense lawyers, so I'm one of the defense lawyers at the at the trial court level, at the High Court level in Bombay. In Delhi Supreme Court, I personally am not involved, but the lawyers who are there are again a team of lawyers who have fought almost pro bono for this case, because ultimately it's a case which represents the incarceration of civil liberties, the curbing of civil liberties. So the lawyers too have taken it up as that kind of a challenge. I would say we have the best legal minds in this case. We've had lawyers, I mentioned Indira Jaising, but in Bombay, Mihir Desai, Sudeep Pasbola, Yug Chaudhary, Advocate Satyanarayan. These are all, extremely competent lawyers at the High Court level. At the trial court, we also have Sharif Sheikh, Wahab Khan, and, there's a whole array of lawyers. Supreme Court, apart from Indira Jaising, Anand Grover, Vrinda Grover, Rebecca John, R.S. Basant, A.M. Singhvi. I mean, all the names, the lawyers, Kapil Sibal, all these persons have argued because for them, those behind bars are unjustly behind bars. So therefore, they too have given their best in trying to get freedom for these people who have been incarcerated, wrongly incarcerated. Yeah.
So here's a question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
Oh, well, if you believe in the justice system, or you believe in true democracy, or if you believe in civil liberties, you have no choice but to. I mean, I started my practice working as a trade unionist. So when you start as a trade unionist, you work for workers who are wrongly terminated, retrenched, who lose their lives or their limbs, and you try and get them minimum wages. So ultimately, you're following what is a constitutional dream of life and liberty, equality, fraternity for the downtrodden, you know. So, in this category are those people who are wrongly incarcerated. The concept of political prisoners was coined during the time of the British colonial rule, that all those who dissented against the British Raj and who were incarcerated were referred to as political prisoners. Post 1947, there has been a debate that since we have a democracy in place now, it is a sovereign rule of rule for Indians by Indians. Why do you need? I mean, the term political prisoners does this make sense? But of course, it makes sense because each political dispensation, whether it was Indira Gandhi during the emergency or any government, has always used laws, whether it's in the conflict-ridden areas of Kashmir or the Northeast or Punjab. There have been a large number of dissenters who are put behind bars, and the term that is used for them, it is political prisoners. Amnesty International refers to them as prisoners of conscience. Call it what you may, but even political system uses the law to incarcerate people for no crime, but only because of their role as dissenters. Then there is nothing else to call them. You may call them criminals because you have locked them up under laws convenient laws. But the fact is, none of them have committed any crime against society. They have not committed any offense, or it's only that they have spoken truth to power, and for this, the punishment has been imprisonment. So that is why you call them true. So their numbers are growing in our country. So that is what is worrying. At one time, it used to be people who actually fought on the streets. Today, you have those who write, those who agitate in courts, those who agitate against unjust laws. Anyone and everyone is brought under the purview of so-called security laws. This is a hard reality in our country today.
Susan, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and talking about what I think is an absolutely critical case for our democracy and rights.
Thank you, and I would call upon listeners to your program to extend support in whichever way they can, in terms of there's a legal team working, we require funds, then we require campaigns, we require support, their families need support. So any kind of help in reaching out would be welcome. Thank you, Ashra.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINEER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.